Hello, and welcome to Backyard Wonders. I'm Charles Reith, your host. Today we meet some of our region's oldest residents, and we learn about their ecological and economic importance. Today we meet our stately state tree, the baldcypress. We start our journey here at Fontainebleau State Park, a pearl of a place along the south shore of the North Shore, not far from Mandeville. I've visited this park many times with my kids, but this is the first visit since Katrina, and wow, what a difference. I think it's important to visit natural areas after a hurricane because we realize it's not just our homes and neighborhoods that get damaged, nature takes a beating too. But if we look around here, we'll see that some of the trees, particularly the live oaks and the baldcypresses, stood up to the fury of nature without damage. Landscape architects and developers would do very well to include these trees, to emphasize them in the design and development of neighborhoods, where they can stand like sentinels over the rooftops of our homes, protecting our homes, our streets, and our power lines from the fury of future storms. So let's go take a closer look at some of the baldcypress here at Fontainebleau and learn about its distinctive features. As you may know, baldcypresses are closely related to the coastal redwood and sequoia of California, two other trees that share its propensity for becoming very large. All three are members of the cypress family, and they have these feathery twigs with needles that are very closely packed along the twig. The difference between the baldcypress and the redwood and sequoia is that the needles actually turn orange in the fall and drop during the winters. It's a deciduous tree, hence its name, baldcypress. Other features of baldcypress include these hard terminal reproductive structures and this shredded bark, which looks orange or pink in different lights. My favorite features are down at the base, where the trunk expands to maximize its contact with the soil. In older trees, we actually have folding into flute-like buttresses, which increase the stability of the tree. And then looking away from the base, we have cypress knees, which rise like periscopes through the soil. These are snorkel-like appendages which allow oxygen to get down to the roots of the baldcypress and provide oxygen in soils that's very saturated and depleted of oxygen under certain circumstances. Now, what we don't see here that's very important is the quality of the wood. Cypress wood is famously durable and easy to work with. So let's go meet some craftsmen whose life work has been to make beauty out of cypress wood. We've seen that cypress forests are very beautiful and they're ecologically important to our state. In the hands of a craftsman, cypress wood is also beautiful and it's an economic asset to our state. One such craftsman is Terry Wild of Wild Woods Fine Works in Wood. Here we are at Terry's shop. Terry, tell us a little bit about what you do here.
Well, I do a variety of things, Charles. I build custom furniture, a lot of it made of cypress. We build beautiful cabinetry, handcrafted cabinetry. We do solid wood doors, plantation shutters, staircases. We restore and repair fine furniture and antiques, as well as many other custom woodworking products.
Now, I know you work with many kinds of wood. How does cypress compare? What are its virtues?
Well, cypress is uniquely beautiful and has an incredible quality to the grain, but it also has properties that make it very long-lasting and durable, and the cypressine oil, the oil content in the wood makes it very resistant to rot as well as to termites.
I've heard because of the durability of cypress, it's not always fashioned out of fresh cut lumber. Do you actually receive cypress from other uses and recycle it, if you will?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to use reclaimed lumber, wood that came from old buildings and houses that were torn down, and take this wood and clean it up and turn it into furniture and cabinetry.
Well, Terry's shop is full of treasures, but my favorite part is Terry's office. It has all the beautiful faces of cypress in one place. Can you give us a look around your office?
Sure, I'd love to. This desk right here is an example of antique reclaimed cypress, which comes from old buildings or houses that were torn down. You can see by the frequent holes, these are actual nail holes where the wood used to be nailed to the building. We get this wood after it's been salvaged. We denail the lumber and metal detect it to make sure that we have pulled all the fragments of the nails out, and then the wood goes through the different machining processes that we use to make the piece of furniture. This roll-top desk is also an example of antique cypress. It does not have the nail holes that you saw in the previous piece, but it is the same type of wood. It has just been selected to be free of nail holes or knots to exhibit a clear grade of this antique lumber. This desktop is a further example of cypress. This wood is actually sinker cypress, which comes from cypress trees that, for one reason or another, fell down or got knocked down and submerged underwater. The tree or the log, when it is submerged, is timelessly preserved, and depending upon where the log fell and is lying underwater will affect the coloration that comes out in the wood. If the log is laying in a very heavy mineralized mud base, it can tend to turn colors of green and brown and chocolate, even purple sometimes. If it's in a fast-moving stream or current, in a sand bottom base, for example, the wood might be more reddish or golden or honey colored. So the different colors of the wood is one of the main reasons that people love it. It's very exotic looking. The cabinets that you see here are made from antique cypress as well. This particular wood came from a 100-year-old barn that was torn down in a little town of Springfield just west of Ponchatoula. And this wood is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 3,000 year old wood. It came from the giant cypress trees that line the coastline of Lake Maurepas and the surrounding areas. And the store frame that you see right here is Pecky cypress. Pecky cypress has these pock marks that make it kind of look like Swiss cheese. These marks or holes in the wood are actually a form of fungus that grows in a tree, and these pock marks can be very uniform in appearance sometimes, which gives it a really unique character.
Well, here we are in New Orleans, which is a fitting place to talk about the durability of homes and other structures. In the face of nature's most furious assaults, for instance, the wind and water of Katrina, or more assiduous attacks by, say, Formosan termites, there are clearly winners and losers. Sometimes in a single neighborhood, even side by side, you'll see two homes where one is in great shape and the other is clearly in distress. Here to talk to us a little bit about winners and losers in construction is Paul Laplace. We're on the porch of his winning home, which is made out of cypress. Paul, thanks for having us here, and tell us a little bit about the important work that you do.
Well, I've been repairing these old houses in New Orleans for many years, and cypress is a very integral part of them. It's a durable wood. It's lightweight, it's strong, it's bug resistant, and basically resistant to water too for damaging effects. A lot of the old homes you just see that don't have paint on them, if you look closely and the weatherboards are all straight, I mean, it's a cypress house. And, you know, a house been there 100 years without paint, that's saying something.
So it's durable and workable. What are your favorite attributes of cypress wood?
Probably the ease with which you can work with it, because you can cut just about any shape and it'll stay that way. And in fact, if you go to, you can actually bend it if necessary.
I understand there's a few things you can show us right here on the porch.
Right here, if you look up at those brackets, those are made out of cypress, and those little finials and all that turnwort, all the fancy stuff is cypress, and that's how they dress the house up. This is a Victorian double here.
Okay, and there's even more to see around back?
There's some other interesting items, I believe.
So let's go take a look.
All right, well, we'll walk this way. There's some cypress that I've salvaged. There's an old shutter right here, one of many that have been around 100 years, and they're just as durable as can be. And over this way, we have a louvered shutter that blew off during a hurricane and I had to repair it. You see the 3 slats at the top?
All right.
That's old cypress that I remilled and put up in there. So it'll probably last another 100 years. Okay. So we'll see that. And back here is a collection of different pieces of cypress, mostly from millwork windows and things that people have thrown away, but the cypress is still good, so I saved it. And below is these are 6x8 cypress sills that actually came out of the French Quarter. A building was torn down, and I couldn't let that cypress just disappear. And then the big house behind us has a lot of cypress architecture, the cypress shutters, cypress millwork at the front of the house. Even the columns, those are turned cypress columns, cypress balusters, banisters. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that wasn't cypress siding on that house too. Real fancy work up there, those little brackets and things.
Man, that's beautiful.
Over here's a collection of old cypress shutters that I've actually picked them up, and I'm going to recycle them and use them somewhere. You see some of them are worse shape than others, but they're still mostly in pretty good shape, and they're solid.
When you say old, how old?
Oh, they're every bit of 100 years old.
Wow, amazing.
I don't think any of these, and there may be a new one in there, but I don't think so.
And look, it still works.
There's so much usefulness in it. I mean, you can reuse it for all kinds of things. There'll be the hurricane protection for this home, and it'll last 100 years if it lasts a minute. Over here is 2 old cypress columns that I picked up, and I'm going to use them for something, and they're as good as they were when they were made. They have little scratches in them. But
so each one, if we looked at it in cross-section, would be shaped like a wedge of pie?
Correct.
And they squeeze them together to make a column?
8 or 9, like a barrel, actually.
Oh, like a barrel, okay.
They're not round like a post, they're tapered.
Tapered? Oh, okay.
Look closer.
Just like the trunk of a cypress tree.
That's correct.
Here we are at the Barataria unit of Jean Lafitte National Park. And we have baldcypress in its finest state, a closed canopy forest. The cypress trees in this forest are close to each other, and their roots and knees are interwoven in a continuous mat of contact between the soil and the canopy. It makes this forest very resistant against the wind. It's like an ecological fortress against hurricanes. Now, what I'm standing in here is a true swamp. The soil is nearly always saturated. When I squeeze it, you can see the moisture dripping out. The water table fluctuates, and sometimes standing water would come up to my shoulders or even higher. The saturated or oxygen-deprived condition of the soil and the fluctuating water table creates conditions that are very difficult for most species of trees. Baldcypress are among the best adapted of all trees to such circumstances. But there's one other tree here I really like. I really think of it as a friend to the cypress tree in a healthy baldcypress ecosystem, and that's the tupelo tree. Let's go take a look at this tupelo over here. Tupelo is similar to baldcypress in some ways and different in others. One similarity we can't help but notice is the expanded base right above contact with the soil. In this older tree, we can see folds beginning to form in the base, but it will never become as deeply fluted as the buttresses of a baldcypress tree. Another difference between tupelo and cypress trees is the fact that we don't have knees for tupelos. There's knees all around me here, but these are from the adjacent cypress tree, not from our tupelo here. The biggest difference is that tupelos are not conifers. Baldcypresses have these narrow needles and cones, whereas a tupelo has broad leaves like this that change color in the fall and drop during the winter. Tupelo is a true flowering plant. Its flowers happen to be very popular with honeybees that in turn produce tupelo honey.
She's as sweet as tupelo honey. She's an angel of the first degree. the sweet as Tupelo honey, just like honey, baby, from the bee.
Well, we've seen some very beautiful and healthy baldcypress forests here at Jean Lafitte National Park. But it's important to remember that what we see today is just a shadow of the stately forests that grew here before the loggers came. To remind us of how big the trees used to be, we have a lone relic, a giant cypress behind me here at Jean Lafitte. Can you imagine a whole forest of trees of that stature? As big as that tree is, I can take you to see even bigger ones, including the largest baldcypress in the world. It's not a particularly healthy forest ecosystem, but it's definitely worth the trip to Cat Island National Wildlife Refuge. Here I am at Cat Island National Wildlife Refuge, not far from St. Francisville. And behind me is a baldcypress tree that is the largest tree east of the Sierra Nevada. Baldcypresses and their western relatives, redwoods and sequoias, are capable of living a long time and growing very large. The big difference between Louisiana's cypress and the redwoods and sequoias of the West is that the forests of the West have been better protected. And in fact, in national parks in California and Oregon, groves of these trees, of the giants, are visited as cathedral-like testaments to the greatness of trees by tourists from all over the world. Unfortunately, almost all of the old-growth cypress forest of Louisiana has fallen victim to the loggers' saw, and the giants that we see here in Cat Island are few and far between. In the future, we need to protect these forests. We need to restore the environment in which they grow and value the habitat that they will provide to future generations. Habitat is a very important word in ecology. It means a place to live. And this big old baldcypress is a place to live for many different species of plants and animals. Now me, I don't actually live in this tree, but if we took a close enough look, we would see lots of critters that do. The roots are just teeming with bacteria and fungi and lots of microscopic insects. Larger creatures like worms and mites are all around the base of the tree. And as we go up the outside, we'll see lots of different insects and epiphytic plants. That means plants that live on the surface of the tree, like moss and Spanish moss. When we go up to the top, we would find birds nesting and bats roosting. We need to be mindful of the fact that when we cut even a single tree, we're displacing many residents. And we have to cut trees only within a plan that preserves habitat, so that the trees that are fallen, the residents of those trees have adjacent trees to go to establish their habitat. We've established the importance of an individual tree as habitat, but sometimes it takes a forest. For species like the Louisiana black bear and the puma, you have to have larger areas of protected forest where these species can hunt and feel secure. One species that depended on a large area of cypress forest was the ivory-billed woodpecker, a pretty large bird with a flashy crest, always a pleasure for a birder to see in the first half of the 20th century. But these birds lived in close association with cypress forests, and as the forests cut, the sightings became rarer and rarer until the species faded into that biological oblivion called extinction. Well, that's what we thought until just a couple of years ago when an LSU student who was working down in the Pearl River area reported hearing the distinctive tap-tap of the ivory bill. He was a credible student, and it attracted biologists from all over who set up tape recorders and automated cameras in hopes of rediscovering the ivory-billed woodpecker, rescuing it from extinction, if you will. Well, that effort didn't work out. Everybody was discouraged until more recently in Arkansas, there were credible sightings with some fuzzy but viewable videotape of the ivory-billed. So here we have it. We've rediscovered a bird who lives in close association with the baldcypress that we once thought was extinct. We have a second chance. What are we going to do with it?
It's the great God bird down in Arkansas and the sewing machine. The industrial God in paradise might close from its safe flight flood. It's the great God bird through it.
We're back at Fontainebleau State Park, where I'm sitting in the midst of a baldcypress grove that I've always found very scenic. These trees are pretty to look at, but they're clearly in distress because of the way the water has washed the soil from under the roots, exposing them like the root I'm sitting on. Unfortunately, the distressed state of this grove is symptomatic of the condition of baldcypress forests throughout the South. Once healthy and pervasive, these forests are in steep decline due to a failure to protect the habitat and continued unsustainable logging. It's really important that we start protecting these habitats and restoring them to their former strength and ecological value. A champion in that cause is Dr. Gary Schaefer of Southeastern Louisiana University. Let's take a boat ride to meet Gary at one of his project sites.
This is the first restoration project ever to go into a swamp. All the other restoration projects have been with marshes. What we do is we measure the growth rate of around 1,500 trees. This site is part of a large project that we proposed in 1999 with the Environmental Protection Agency to bring the Mississippi River back into the Maurepas Swamp, which is a degrading swamp. This swamp, without the help of the Mississippi River, may be gone in about 2 decades. And that's what the diversion is going to do, what we call a diversion. It's the reintroduction of the river into degrading wetlands. Historically, up until about the 1890s, the Mississippi River would overbank its natural levees, and that beautiful water would flood in here, fresh water full of nutrients and sediment, build the elevations up, allow for very high growth rates, basically maximal growth rates. And then when that was levied, the swamp no longer was nourished with fresh water, and so we get these wedges of salt water coming in every year now, and these are not saltwater plants, they're freshwater plants.
I'm involved in all aspects of what goes on at this site, from the actual monitoring of the health of the system to an experiment that we add sediment and fertilizer to mimic a diversion, or as closely as we can mimic a diversion, to try and get a root response from the cypress to actually increase the level of the soil to help counteract sea level rise and to try to keep this swamp just above sea level where it can maintain its health and growth.
The cypress and the tupelo have very unique laterally spreading root systems, and what they do is they interweave with each other and form a tapestry underground, and because of that it's very difficult for wind to blow them over. They're among the most stable trees on planet Earth. Along with the palms and live oaks, cypress and tupelo are about the hardest trees to blow down. And what we've seen here is that there's a critical amount of wood necessary on a plot for the cypress and tupelo to actually hold the ash and the maple. The mid-story trees here are ash and maple, and in sites that are a little more open than this, we lost up to 100% of our maple and ash because there wasn't quite enough wood biomass of cypress and tupelo.
The most exciting part of my work would be when we get a restoration to a healthy site that my kids and my grandkids can come to and say, this is what Louisiana looked like before we foolishly cut all the timber down and destroyed the system, and now we're trying to recreate a natural system, one of the most beautiful and viable systems on Earth.
It's fitting that we end our journey with baldcypress at the beautiful property of Jonathan Riley, not far from Folsom, Louisiana. Jonathan's backyard captures that ideal harmony between human habitation and nature, because he has many horticultural virtues here, some lawns, lovely views and fragrances, but also a very effective collection of native species, including this baldcypress here and the gardenias behind me. Join me now on a tour with Jonathan as we look at some of the other native species on his property and hear about their virtues.
I've owned this property about 6 years. It's a 20-acre piece of property and an old farmhouse, a 100-year-old farmhouse here. We've tried to let it go back to its more natural state and quit cutting so much grass and allow even around the pond this edge to develop. As you can see, it's quite prolific and all sorts of stuff is growing up. And it's pretty amazing how fertile an edge this is to the pond. This is another example of what will come up in the fertile edge of a pond if you let it go. And the elderberry has popped up right here. Well, I think we've all heard of elderberry wine. I'm not so sure how many people have actually had elderberry wine, but I think there's some songs about it.
To get my berry off the vine, mix up the bed, so mighty, mighty fine. Sitting on that river, baby, drinking elderberry wine.
And over here on the southeast corner of the house, we have a very old magnolia tree, very large and tall, provides a great mulching with its leaves. It can be either raked up and put into a compost pile, and it's beautiful shade, protecting the southern part of the house from the hot sun. And it has a beautiful flower, as we're all familiar with the magnolia flower. Another native species to this backyard is the muscadine vine. And it does really well in acid soils, as you can tell, because it's just overtaken this whole trellis here, and it produces a wonderful fruit that you can make muscadine wine from, and muscadine jelly, and it's great for the wildlife. They love eating it as well. It has many purposes, and it's pretty good. It turns purple later on when it really gets more ripe. A little bitter right now.
We hope you've enjoyed our journey with the baldcypress and our explorations of its ecological and economic importance to our region. Whether in forests, neighborhoods, or the hands of a master craftsman, baldcypress is so valuable. Nature is full of valuable treasures, which is why it's important to learn as much as we can to protect and restore our natural heritage. Thank you for joining us on Backyard Wonders, where we explore the flora and fauna of the Florida parishes. I'm your host, Charles Reeve.